Joining us now, the president and CEO of the NAACP, Derrick Johnson. I guess we'll start there and then broaden out. What do you make of these text messages, and what's it signifying in terms of what's to come?
Well, not surprising. If you can recall, when Trump was in office before, we've seen an increase in racial hate crimes. In 1 week alone, attacks on Latinos in El Paso, African Americans in Louisville, and the Jewish community in Pittsburgh, just in a 1 week span with mass shootings. And so we are not surprised that this is taking place. And unfortunately, we are in for 4 years of this.
Rev, your take?
Well, we must remember in the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, that is when George Floyd happened, that's when Breonna Taylor happened, that's when Ahmaud Arbery, probably three of the most memorable racial cases of our time. And he said nothing as president. He went in front of a church and lectured the protesters holding up a Bible. And I think that as Derrick, as we started getting calls at National Action Network, and I know you were overwhelmed yesterday about these text messages, it brings back this whole feeling of our community under siege. And you've got to remember, Trump just a couple of weeks ago said, well, some slavery could have stayed in. These people are being emboldened and feel empowered with the reelection of Donald Trump. And I think that message didn't get through even to some young black men because of the anxiety of the economic woes we were dealing with.
Yeah. You know, in terms of the election itself, the Democratic business model is dysfunctional. It's a diminishing return on investment. They emphasize nationalizing the campaign on media buys, and they don't spend enough time on the doors. They don't empower local and state actors. They're not expanding the pie. And so what we have seen over the last 15 plus years is the same playbook, and we're getting diminishing returns. VP, her execution of this campaign was flawless. She did exactly what she was supposed to do.
Absolutely.
But when I got to Pennsylvania, when I was in Atlanta, I realized some gaps there, that the people who were working in the campaign that was hired before the VP was in place, they were disconnected from the communities. If African Americans, we're a reliable voting bloc, but we have to be persuaded. We have to be mobilized. And the model they use is mobilization only and not persuasion. The median age of our community is 32 years old. Think about that. A significant number of individuals, they didn't grow up looking at broadcast news. Right. They didn't grow up looking at cable news. They grew up looking at social media platforms that's unregulated, full of mis and disinformation. And so we have to communicate with them differently.
Nailed it, yeah.
Yeah, no question there. So let's talk big picture. Where does the party go from here? I mean, certainly, you know, Donald Trump tried to court black voters this time around, didn't actually end up having much success. He had major inroads, though, with the Latino population. But what you know, so many voters on the trail, though, and Rev, you've attested to this, is there are so many members of the black community who just feel like their vote has been taken for granted. That just they show up every, you know, the candidate shows up every 4 years. So how can that fundamental dynamic change? How can they feel more included, more part of the process?
One, the black vote should not be taken for granted. We need to have a conversation with the black community, and it's a persuasion conversation. Two, the consultant class gotta be pushed back because they're controlling multi-billion-dollar campaigns with no real accountability and a lot of self-dealings. And so what you find is no infrastructure between elections, individuals being grossly enriched, and the candidates can be perfect. And what happens is, regardless of the candidate, the infrastructure is still in place, and that goes back 15, 20 years. And it's frustrating, to say the least.
I can imagine. President and CEO of the NAACP,